It's like a lost fragment of civilization. The lonely and weathered house in Avon Crest, sitting alongside the winding Avon River. It's minutes from central Christfield, a popular city destination in New Zealand. The streets silent, the wind carrying nothing but the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city nearby. Where laughter once echoed and children played in the afternoon sun, there was now only the creeping grasp of nature reclaiming what had been lost. A battered playground fighting to stay upright, the roads disappearing underwater every time it rains. Otherwise, nothing but the clamor of birds. Cracks split the pavement like scars on the earth's skin, and where houses once stood, only hollowed skeletons remained, abandoned, forgotten, surrendered. All except one. In the middle of what had become known as the Red Zone District in Christfield, where the government had declared it unsafe after several devastating earthquakes rocked the city and brought out the lives of those who once lived there, a single house remained occupied. With its pleasantly yellow weatherboards, ivy-green splashed window frames, a gnarled willow twisting impressively over a side path, the house itself, though weathered and bruised by the earthquakes, still stood tall, defiant. Inside, John Mailer sat at his worn kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee as he stared out the window. His beard had grown wild, streaked with grey, much like the untamed land outside. The quakes had come and gone, leaving devastation in their wake, but John had stayed. His neighbors had packed up and moved on, their homes flattened or swallowed by the earth. They'd urged him to leave too. It's not safe, they'd said. You can start fresh elsewhere. But this was home. John wasn't a man easily swayed by fear. The land beneath him had trembled, sure, but he had planted roots here long before the ground had split open. His life had dramatically changed after a serious accident a few decades back that left him paraplegic. But he adapted. He could still remember the day he'd built the garden shed with his father, the tree he'd planted the year his mother passed, and the warm nights spent on the porch with his sweetheart. Those memories lived in every creak of the wooden floors and every gust of wind that rattled the windows. To leave would be to erase his entire life. His sister had never understood why he stayed. Their relationship had always been strained, even before the earthquakes. But it had grown worse after the disaster. She was practical, always pushing him to sell the house, to leave the red zone. "You're stubborn, John," she'd tell him during their rare phone calls. "You can't stay out there forever. You need help." But John didn't want help. He wanted to live on his own terms, even if it meant isolation. His sister's visits had become less frequent over the years, and eventually they stopped altogether. She'd moved on, and John had remained alone in a sanctuary. The red zone felt like the aftermath of a forgotten war. Rubble still lined the streets in some areas, while weeds sprouted from the cracks in concrete. Nature was relentless, creeping through the remains of human settlement. But John welcomed it. It was a slow reclamation of a peaceful encroachment. He'd watch birds build nests in the ruins of what was once his neighbor's bedroom, and vines wrapped themselves around the hollow frames of empty houses. Every so often, a car would drive past on the outskirts of the red zone, a reminder that the world outside still moved on. But John didn't care much for that world anymore. His world was here, within the boundaries that once held a thriving neighborhood. The stillness suited him. The local authorities had long since stopped coming around. At first, they tried to convince him, politely, to leave, with the Crown offering John a payout. Then, when the offers of financial compensation didn't work, they issued subtle warnings. But John had been steadfast. Eventually, they stopped trying. He was a relic now, much like the abandoned houses that dotted the landscape. Nearly 6 months after the first earthquake occurred, on the 4th of September 2010, the large destructive aftershock, a magnitude 6.3, devastated the already damaged houses where John lived, hitting the area on February the 22nd, 2011. Soon, bulldozers lined the streets like grim sentinels, demolishing all the houses around him. One by one, his old neighbors' homes fell under the crushing weight of machinery, turning what was once a lively community into an urban wasteland. Only the tree lines and bushes stood as the last remnants, marking the boundaries that once divided each property. Yet, John's house remained, the last one standing, defiant in the face of abandonment. He had refused to sell on many occasions. He'd lost count. This was home, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. John Mailer even christened it Utapara Korokro, a word he made up. The 62-year-old's home was a reflection of his life, both chaotic and cherished. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of happier times. His smiling sweetheart, family gatherings, seemed like distant dreams now. He had transformed the living room into a lush green oasis, filling every corner with vibrant potted plants that breathed life into the space. The garden outside was a testament to stubbornness. Over the years, he had cultivated a patch of green that fought against the encroaching wildness of the red zone. He tended to the flowers and vegetables, wheeling himself along the uneven ground, using every bit of strength to maintain what little remained of his world. He found solace in the dirt beneath his fingers, the smell of earth mingling with the fresh air. The red zone became John's world, and as the years and seasons passed, he had begun to feel the unmistakable weight of age pressing down on him. The years had not been kind to his body, which had already been battered by the accident that left him paraplegic. But now, as he entered his 60s, a new kind of frailty had crept into his life, one that he couldn't quite push through with sheer determination like he had done before. He moved slower than he used to, his paraplegia further complicating his daily life. A fall could be catastrophic, but John adapted, as he always had. The winters were brutal, unforgiving. Damp air seeped into the walls of his house, making the nights colder and harder to bear. Nights were particularly challenging, filled with the echoes of the past. As the damp cold crept in, John would wrap himself in a quilt made by the love of his life and sit by the heater, lost in memories of family gatherings, laughter and warmth. He felt the weight of loneliness pressing in, but he fought against it, reminding himself of the beauty he still had in his garden, the last standing piece of a life that had once been vibrant. Then came the storm during midwinter of 2017, one that wouldn't soon be forgotten. The sky had darkened early, thick, heavy clouds rolling in from the ocean and blanketing the red zone in a foreboding gloom. John, sitting in his weathered armchair next to his faithful blow heater, could feel the tension in the air as the wind began to pick up. He'd lived through his share of storms, but this one felt different. There was a strange electricity to it, as though the earth itself was bracing for something monumental. As dusk fell, the first drops of rain began to tap against the windows of his weathered house. Within minutes, the light drizzle turned into a torrential downpour. The sound of the rain beating down on the roof was deafening, a constant drum roll that seemed to shake the entire house. The wind howled through the power lines, lining the deserted streets of the red zone, shaking his home with a relentless force, as if determined to bring it crashing down. It was as if the storm was trying to finish what the earthquakes had started years ago. John watched from his chair as the rain lashed against his windows, the droplets blurring the view of his once beautiful garden, now overgrown and wild. The cracks in the walls and ceiling, which had grown more prominent in the past few months, began to let in water. Small streams trickled down the walls, pooling in corners and soaking the already damp floor. The house groaned under the weight of the storm, and John could do little but sit there and listen to the chaos outside. The heater John was huddled up against struggled to keep the cold at bay. The dampness had seeped into everything, making the air heavy and clammy. His joints ached from the moisture. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders and leaned forward, trying to catch any bit of warmth from the heater. Despite the harsh conditions and his isolation, what many people didn't realize was that John was never truly alone. His constant companion was his cell phone, not for calling, texting, or browsing, but for something far more personal. He used it religiously to record himself, creating an audio diary that chronicled his life in the red zone. Through these recordings, he poured his thoughts and feelings, capturing the slow decay of the neighborhood, the storms that rattled his home, and the many memories he had made living alongside the river that wrapped around the red zone. These entries became his lifeline, a way to release the emotions he kept locked inside and preserve the memories he held dear. Though these recordings were never released to the public, an anonymous source circulated an audio file several years after his death, claiming it to be John Mailer's final message, recorded on that cold, stormy night, just hours before his body was discovered. Neither his family nor the few friends that he had could definitely confirm his voice due to the poor quality of the recording, though some said it bore an uncanny resemblance. We made every effort to digitally enhance the audio file, refining it as much as possible to achieve a clearer sound.
Bloody freezing. Trying to keep warm in front of my blow heater here. It's almost pointless, really. Useless fucking thing. It's bad out there. It's bad out there. It's stormy. It's blowing like 40 bastards. I've been through some pretty rough shit in my life, but this one has to top them all. It's starting to flood real bad out there too. Just looking out there. You can probably hear the rain hitting the roof. So I'm gonna buckle in tight on my wheels and just wait it out. I'm just sitting here, you know. I wouldn't change a damn thing. Sounds maybe ridiculous, but I wouldn't. Just another obstacle to overcome. Just another test. What about a Korokoro? She's strong. She's still standing. I always call it my country in the city. Yeah. Road. It's underwater in the moment, but it'll be accessible again once this storm is over, and then people will come back. This place will become a bloody tourist attraction. Quite surprising the number of people who come along here with their dogs. Makes sense, I like space. There's lots of space. I like historical values, you know. It's ideal. I always get the giggles from people who read my sign in the front. It says, "Thieves will be shot, possibly in the backs." Just love this area. It's all. I love trees. Wish I was a tree. Rooted, firm. Not rubble like many other houses. So sad, really. The number of bloody houses that were still perfectly livable before the fucking bulldozers came rushing in was absolutely amazing. You know, large part of the heritage is gone, and it's very sad. What little New Zealand has as history, they bloody bulldozer. Now I feel like I'm just a burden on them. I can't be bothered. They just want to pay me out, be done with it, want me to leave, want me to live in a townhouse on the other side of the river. There's no way I'm living in a fucking townhouse. Bureaucratic bullshit. There are two things I abhor. Absolutely hate. One is paperwork. I mean, I've still got 10 years of unopened mail sitting in my mailbox. Yet the dutiful posties still deliver it. She should have caught on to it by now that I don't check my mailbox and I don't give a shit about paperwork. Hate it. The other thing I hate is slowness of the system to come to the party. I mean, I understand when people ask me why stay. You know, why stay? Why put up with it all? When the mud and the water churn in my wheelchair, when I got delinquents that are roaming the wasteland at night with their fucking spray paint in their lighters, I've got authorities that knock on my door, tame the jungle that it felt like, you know, an extension of your garden. Good questions. Why stay? I'm very timid. And I love this area. And if push comes to shove, I'll protest. I think I'll protest. I'd like to stay here. And for whoever may listen to this one day, I think I get a lot of support. We see what happens. I'll be around a bit longer yet. Yeah. I'll end it there for today. Shit, a lot of loud banging going on around the house. I just hope that the storm doesn't lift off my fucking roof. Quite frightening, really. Just me, the house, and this useless blow heater. But, you know, it's funny because it's not Mother Nature I fear at all right now. Because this is Mother Nature just fighting back, reclaiming what's hers. But what I and Mother Nature fear is the same thing. And that's people. It's the people I fear most. Yeah.
The recording ended here. By dawn, the storm had begun to subside, but the damage was done. The streets were still flooded, the muddy water swirling around the foundations of his home. In the morning light, the house looked more worn than ever, its walls streaked with rain and its roof sagging under the weight of the storm. But inside, John Mailer lay still. His body was found by his gardener, who, after the storm had passed, was concerned for his safety. John was found slumped on the floor near the blow heater, where he had tried to stay warm through the night. The coroner's initial report was inconclusive. It pointed to his long history of bladder stones, a recurring problem that had led to his recent surgery. The cold had likely overwhelmed his weakened body, and it appeared he had fallen out of his chair in a deep sleep, unable to move. His paraplegia made him vulnerable to falls, and another broken vertebra would have left him tetraplegic had he survived at all. However, an unsettling detail caught the attention of those who knew him well. His safety belt. For years, John had been meticulous about securing himself in his wheelchair, especially after the falls he'd suffered in the past. His paraplegia meant that any sudden movement or shift in balance could send him tumbling, so he had always made sure to fasten the thick black belt around his waist whenever he was in his chair. It was second nature to him, a habit he never broke, especially in those cold, stormy nights when his body felt weaker and the risk of slipping was higher. He knew that a fall could leave him completely incapacitated. But when they found him, lying motionless on the floor, the belt was undone. It was a small detail, but one that sent a chill through those who knew how careful John had always been. The belt, hanging limply from either side of the chair, was a glaring contradiction to everything they knew about his routine. If John had indeed fallen out of his chair, as the scene suggested, why was the belt unfastened? It wasn't something he would have neglected. The voice recording where he says, "buckle in tight," is a clear indication that John was indeed wearing his safety belt on that treacherous night. Had someone undone it after the fall? Or worse, had it been unfastened beforehand, leaving John vulnerable in the middle of a stormy night when his body was already at its weakest? Another unsettling detail emerged, but only a year or so after his death. One that carried eerie significance. Lying near him, just inches from his outstretched hand, was an old, weathered brick. This was no ordinary brick. It was a piece of rubble from the ruins of his neighborhood, salvaged after the second earthquake. For John, the brick was a poignant reminder of the devastation the earthquakes had left behind. A symbol of both destruction and his own stubborn resilience. He had kept it on a high shelf, out of sight, but never out of mind. A private monument to the home and the life he and others had lost when the Red Zone was created. A number of people recall John showing them this item when visiting his home, which had indeed become quite the magnet for locals and earthquake enthusiasts alike. John's disability had made even simple movements a challenge, and he lacked the physical strength to stretch upward. The brig had remained there for years, untouched, resting high up like a relic of the past. Yet, there it was, on the floor beside him. How had it gotten there? The shelf was far beyond his reach from the wheelchair, and no one had visited him in the days leading up to the storm. The brick's presence on the floor added another layer of strangeness to the already suspicious circumstances. As officials examined the scene, the significance of the brick wasn't lost on those who knew him. People couldn't help but wonder if the brick had been deliberately placed there. Was it meant to send a message? Had someone moved it, arranging the scene to look like an accident while suggesting something far darker beneath the surface? These details, coupled with the eerily upright position of his wheelchair, standing a few feet away, seemingly untouched, fueled even more suspicion. The chair, perfectly aligned and scuff-free, should have toppled with him if he had fallen naturally. And yet, it remained upright, as though placed there after the fact. Many other theories began to swell, particularly among those who had long known of John's defiant stand against the authorities. For years, rumors had circulated that the government wanted John gone. His home, the last standing in the Red Zone, was a costly burden. The infrastructure needed to maintain basic services to a single house, especially the sewage system, which reportedly cost the city $500,000 a year, had become an unacceptable financial strain. Many speculated that the government had been quietly pressuring him to leave. This is evident in the recording. His refusal to sell was more than an inconvenience. It was a financial headache. Some believed John had been the victim of a plot to remove him without a payout. There were whispers that he'd been poisoned or drugged, just enough to disorient him, causing the fall that ultimately killed him. The mysterious recording circulating online, allegedly discovered on his phone the night he died, has only deepened the suspicions. In the audio, his voice is calm, yet unsettling, as though he had come to terms with something inevitable. It's been reported that additional recordings from that same evening existed, but none have ever been verified or brought to light. This has fueled conspiracy theories that the truth was deliberately concealed to prevent a potential scandal. John had survived this long, managing his condition, his isolation, and the dangers of living alone. Many agree it seemed unlikely that he would suddenly succumb to something as simple as a fall. It appears that the city was eager to erase the red zone from its books. And with John gone, the last obstacle had conveniently disappeared. His death notice in the Express, the local newspaper, made no mention of his final stand in the red zone. It said he died in his happy place, Utopara Koroko, on the banks of the River Avon, 2017. Whether his death was the result of natural causes or something more sinister, John Mailer had made his final stand. His harrowing story deserves to be heard and remembered, not forgotten with time. His struggle is more than a tale of survival. It's a testament to the power of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. In a world that often overlooks those who fight against impossible forces, John's unwavering determination to keep his home in Christfield's red zone stands as a profound reminder of the strength of the human spirit. We must honor his legacy by ensuring that his story is not lost, but shared, examined, highlighting broader themes of isolation, defiance, and the harsh realities faced by those who refuse to be silenced or erased.